Arsenal Football Club are often seen as the people's club, right? It's a club of multiculturalism, it's a club of representation, it's a club of morals. Well, you see, now I'm not entirely sure. Arsenal have made a string of worrying decisions over the last 5 years that I think show aspects of the club for what they truly are: aesthetics. Arsenal need to have a long, hard look at themselves. And here's why. I don't think there's ever been a more polarizing fan base, you know? And I should know. I'm a Liverpool fan. What's funny is the vast majority of my friends here are Arsenal fans. Like, in terms of people that I surround myself with in London, Arsenal supporters are my people. Yet on social media, they make me want to scoop out my own eyeballs with a tablespoon. Borderline delusional, but hey, who isn't?
They don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Far too defensive, though in fairness, they watch Mikel Arteta's tactics week in, week out, so you can't blame them for that.
It's fucking shit.
And crucially, way too overly emotional.
I've had enough, blood. I gotta go.
Every moment is a war. Every VAR decision is corruption. In fairness, a couple of them might well have been. Now, it's important that we don't sort of, paint every Arsenal fan with the same brush. As I just said, a lot of my friends in real life happen to be Arsenal fans, and there are more than enough reasonable, realistic ones on social media. But for me, I think football Twitter is honestly at its worst when Arsenal fans are trying to say something intelligent.
And then he links up to a 4-pronged triangle, which will be Saka, Partey, and El Neni.
AFTV were the original curators, and now the modern Arsenal fan is a disciple. And what's even more crazy is the football club themselves follow. Just look at the build-up, right, to the ties in the Champions League between Real Madrid and Paris Saint-Germain. You'd think that Arsenal had genuinely somehow found a way to qualify for the World Cup final. At the end of the day, it's a Champions League knockout game. It's big. It's even massive in the context of Arsenal. But if you want to, be considered a big club, you've got to have a little bit of composure. Real Madrid are a bad example, right? Because for them, winning the Champions League is like beating Leganes on a Friday night. But PSG haven't won this thing either. Did they put out a movie every single time they played Aston Villa? They didn't let their emotion change the narrative. They just went out and did what they needed to do, which was play really fucking good football. To be fair, their social media manager probably doesn't know how to spell Kavicha Kvaratskhelia, so that probably helped as well. The composition of these Arsenal, videos and little movies before these games were great. On paper, they looked aesthetically really good. And they did a pretty decent job of showing off the different types of Arsenal fans that there are. But I think, honestly, it just put a lot of pressure on everybody at the football club. As I said, though, it did a decent way, of looking inclusive, showing the diversity of Arsenal fans. But truthfully, when it comes to Arsenal and caring about that, it's all a scam. Now, this is where things are going to get a little bit more serious in this video, and I am just going to preface it by saying trigger warning. We're going to be talking about, recent news stories and assault. But we are, however, going to go almost chronologically in order from 5 years ago to the present day, because I think that does a pretty good job of showing the kind of crescendo of crazy decision-making that Arsenal have been doing over that time period. So we start off in 2020, all right? Peak COVID. I haven't been outside in 3 months. So a normal 3-month period for me. That was, of course, preventing fans from going and watching their favourite football clubs, and that in turn was having a knock-on effect and leaving a massive financial hole for these football clubs because they weren't able to get supporters through turnstiles, no matchday revenue, and this would alter the very trajectory of certain football clubs. Leicester City's owners, who were heavily invested in the travel industry didn't really exist during COVID because we couldn't fly anywhere. They went from challenging for Europe to unironically employing Wout Faes, aka getting relegated. For Arsenal, and they probably knew they needed to offload some dead wood, but players on big salaries. Did they get rid of Sead Kolasinac? No. Did they get rid of Lucas Torreira? No. Did they get rid of David Luiz? Not a chance. Gunnersaurus? Absolutely. Now, Gunnersaurus, for those who don't know, is the club's mascot, who's been adored, especially by younger fans, since the mid-90s. They brought him in as a mascot back in 1993. Probably the most well-renowned and, famous mascot, I would argue, in the Premier League. A mascot on £70,000 a year, whilst high compared to the average of Premier League clubs, he was getting sacked instead of footballers that were on £120,000 to £150,000 a week. It caused uproar, honestly, amongst Arsenal fans. Given dinosaurs are quite literally extinct, you'd have probably expected a little bit more care. The PETA organisation were absolutely fuming, realising a species that's already done out had been given its P45. Mesut Ozil even offered to pay the mascot's wages instead of the football club, something that was a real slap to the face given what they'd just done to Mesut himself. Mesut Ozil, as I just mentioned, had been in a bit of a furore, some controversy with Arsenal as well. Mesut had just made a statement and made comments about an ongoing political situation in China, which revolved around the treatment of the Uyghur community, a Muslim community community in China, there's claims that like over 1 million of this ethnic group have been held in detention camps in like the northwest of China. It's been an ongoing situation which, to be honest with you, has never really garnered enough like actual media coverage, or certainly wasn't really garnering any at the time. Mesut Ozil was highly critical of this and the Chinese regime, and maybe Mesut was expecting a little bit of backing from his own club. That, however, did not really materialize. Arsenal obviously have a lot of interest when it comes to the Chinese market. A, it's absolutely massive, and I'm sure they have a lot of, Chinese Arsenal fans. B, they also have business ventures in China, like specifically like a chain of restaurants, for example. That led them to being far too worried that they were going to cause any issues in terms of their financial gain, rather than actually addressing maybe potential issues amongst their extremely diverse fan base. They chose not only sitting this one out, but actually distancing themselves away from Mesut Ozil's comments, and ultimately that would lead to him leaving the club and being frozen out of the starting 11. They refused to act on this because they did not want to be seen as political. Now, I want you to remember that statement because it's gonna become pretty hypocritical pretty soon. Now, moving on to 2022, and back then, Alexander Zinchenko would become kind of the center of attention at the football club, and quite rightfully as well. Back in his homeland, Ukraine were the victims of an invasion from their neighboring country of Russia, involving like the part annexation of, an area to the east, and it led to a conflict that's seen so far over 400,000 Ukrainian casualties. And of course, at the start of this conflict, there was interviews with Alexander Zinchenko in which he was extremely emotional, given he has a lot of family and friends, naturally, that are back home, and that would be seriously at risk of potential violence, or of course would end up being drafted and actually fighting in the conflict themselves. The conflict has also taken many Russian lives, and it doesn't really feel like there's going to be a winner of it. I mean, it's a war, there never really is going to be, truly. Either way, Arsenal gave Alexander all of the support they needed. They actually did a very good job during that time period, and later on, even a year later, they would actually make him the captain of the entire football club as a bit of a statement, to kind of stand in solidarity with Alexander. Now, those are pretty definitive steps that the club had taken when speaking out about conflict or about war. And I don't mean to be that person, because they were very right to stand with Alexander. I have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. But war is about as political as it gets. It can't really get any more political than that. So they've already kind of gone against the apolitical stance that they had 2 years prior, but at least it was to make the right decision. So you'd imagine the next time someone spoke out about conflict, spoke out about the unnecessary deaths of civilians, that the football club would do the exact same thing. Yet when Mark Bonnick, the club's kitman, stood up in defense of the civilian killings that were going on in the Gaza region, a toll that has now surpassed 57,000, a 2-year period that's also seen UN-certified war crimes like the killings of UN officials, use of banned substances on the Palestinian people like white phosphorus, targeting of aid workers, and many more on just the general people of the Gaza area. Instead of being supported and backed in his, in his political beliefs, he was suspended and sacked. He tweeted his thoughts on the conflict and called just, for an end, basically, to the unnecessary killings that were going on. This is something from purely a moral perspective, when we look at the actual civilian death toll, that is extremely similar, really, to what Alexander Zinchenko was calling for an end for when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. What we're looking at in total, according to UNICEF, more than 50,000 children, not even just people, children are either actual victims or at the very least have been injured during this. They shouldn't be at risk to this sort of treatment in the same way that the people currently in Eastern Europe shouldn't be either. Yet the stance was extremely different from the football club. And in the same topic, back in October of 2023, returning to Alexander Zinchenko, he had very different comments when it came to this conflict, backing them up once again in 2024, speaking out of his support for Israel. There was no statement from the football club to go against it. There was no statement to just distance themselves like they had done previously with Mesut Ozil. There was no statement, or there was no suspension like they'd given to their kitman. So ultimately, are you political as a football club? Are you willing to back people or stay silent on politics or get involved and sack people, or are you not? Whatever your feelings are on the different conflicts that I've mentioned during the course of this, and there's in my, I have my opinions and I've made them very clear before. Whether you're, pro-genocide or anti it, you simply can't suggest that this isn't hypocritical. If you are going to treat one person who has a political view at your football club one way, i.e. the kitman, and sacking them, but then you're gonna just allow Alexander Zinchenko to say whatever he likes, it's one-sided. You're either truly apolitical and you sack everybody that says anything even remotely politically charged, or you give everybody the freedom of speech without any sort of consequences. Otherwise, you're just supporting the politics that fit your football club. And that doesn't really start to feel like the people's football club at that point, does it? And finally, we get to this month. Allegedly, the most blatant of cover-ups. Back in 2022, and an unnamed man in his 30s in the North London area is arrested on suspicion of multiple counts of SA. Now, it becomes very blaringly obvious very quickly that this is Thomas Partey, and obviously he can't be named as such at the time. That to avoid causing issues in the court proceedings later down the line, and it's also just a legal obligation. Arrested suspects have the right to privacy in the UK until the police officially charge them, and since he hadn't actually been charged, he'd just been arrested, it could be, technically speaking, kind of slanderous if the media started naming him and shaming him. Now, whilst cases like this are obviously very complicated, they're obviously quite difficult to prove sometimes, just purely due to the private nature of it. You know, there's no witnesses a lot of the time. So a lot of times, someone has done this, but it's so borderline impossible to prove that a conviction can't really be made. But in this situation, the Met Police quite literally stated that they were disappointed that this hadn't been taken further like a few months ago, because they thought they had more than enough evidence to actually convict this unnamed man. He'd been questioned, arrested, and then bailed 7 different times during the 3 years between 2022 and now, all whilst helping Arsenal to title charges and whilst representing Ghana at the 2022 World Cup. Now, for what it's worth, he's not the only player or footballer to have been arrested for something and still play for a while until he was charged. We had that with Adam Johnson, who continued playing for Sunderland even after the original allegations had surfaced. He was only sacked when he then pleaded guilty in court. And Benjamin Mendy played for a while at Manchester City. However, some clubs do things very differently. Everton released an unnamed individual immediately after any sort of allegation or talk on social media. And of course, Manchester United suspended Mason Greenwood pretty immediately as well. Now, of course, he had not been charged officially or even obviously been proven guilty up to this point. I know that, and you know, certain clubs are going to make very different decisions on how they treat players that haven't, technically speaking, been found guilty. But what actually makes Arsenal's sort of behavior problematic in this situation is not necessarily that they played him. Again, other teams have done that. It's not ideal, but you know, it can get a little bit difficult in terms of paying out wages if the person's proven to be innocent. But their problematic behavior is 2 things. First of all, they continued to herald him and kind of almost openly presented him as the victim in this situation. He was one of the main players on the club's website until this week just gone. So despite knowing everything that was going on, despite knowing that he'd been arrested on 7 different occasions, he was outwardly speaking one of the poster boys for the entire club. But back in 2022, and even more criminally, okay, and I'm sure you've seen this interview clip by now, Mikel Arteta, after Thomas Partey scored against Tottenham in the North London derby, came out and said that he was happy for Thomas based on everything that he was going through. So based on what he clearly must have thought were false allegations, he was happy for Thomas Partey, despite the fact that, obviously not to this point, I guess, but in the time since he's been arrested on 7 different occasions, Mikel Arteta's happy for him because it was a bit of a difficult time. Okay, cool, but what about the alleged victims? What about what they've been through? They have to watch Arsenal Football Club, pretend that absolutely nothing has happened, watch fans and supporters celebrate when he scores for their football club, and see a decent portion of the fan base still herald him as a hero. The manager then says that he feels happy for him because of the pain that he's gone through based on your allegations, and then the football club make up excuses for him of small, minor injuries anytime there's even the threat of him needing to go to Spain and potentially getting arrested for what he's done. And on the theme of that, Mikel again caught heat for an interview that he did where he seemed to just kind of like make fun of the fact that Thomas Partey is always unavailable for Spanish sides.
Yeah, he felt something, so we didn't want to take any risks.
What was it?
Something.
Like, he wasn't even trying to hide the fact that there clearly wasn't actually an injury. It's just the club trying to protect him once again and running out of ideas on how to present a new injury for the geezer. It's all just like slimy, like very weirdly dismissive behavior of like a very serious topic. And the second issue for me has been the timing of this entire situation, right? Arsenal announced that he's leaving the club, you know, about, I don't know how long ago as you're watching this video, but for me, about 7 days ago. And magically, a matter of days later, the police are officially charging him. It's like they've got all of their final use out of him, and now, you know, the police have told them, right, we're actually gonna charge him. Yeah, okay, fine, we'll get out of here. It's all just very, again, it doesn't really help with the allegations against Arsenal Football Club. They were intentionally trying to cover everything up because ultimately he's an important footballer for them. And I find it a massive slap to the face for the female community, of which there is a big one for Arsenal, because Arsenal Football Club are pioneers of women's football. As early as the early 2000s, Arsenal were dominant in the women's football game and really put it on the map with some legendary footballers that went on to play for England. If there was any football club in this country that you would expect to put the welfare and kind of feelings of that community above anybody else, you would legitimately say that it's Arsenal. Thomas Partey has not been proven guilty, and he may never be, but the slimy sort of unnecessary victim portraying that Arsenal Football Club as a general have done over this news story over the last 3 years is horrible, horrible PR, and also a massive slap to the face, as I mentioned, of all of the female fans that they have. Arsenal always seemed like a club for multiculturalism, a club for representation, and a club for morals. But it turns out it really is just all aesthetics. As I mentioned, it's not all Arsenal fans. You know, I know loads in my personal life, and I see more than enough ones that are sane on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram, that have talked out about how the club have treated Thomas Partey, have talked out about how the club have treated their kitman that I was mentioning earlier on. It's not an attack on Gunners fans. I don't want it to come across like that, but it's actually not. It's an attack on the football club, but it's not an attack on you guys. I actually almost feel kind of sorry for Arsenal fans, because the amount of foolishness that they've been put through in the last 5 years that could have been so easily dealt with in different scenarios is kind of crazy. And once again, I'm not kind of tarnishing Arsenal Football Club and being like, these are the worst, like they're the only teams that do wrong. Manchester United will fire any hard-working, everyday member of staff that they can, instead of getting rid of dead wood that are on like 300k a week. I've talked about Jim Ratcliffe and his ownership of Manchester United in great detail. Lots of football clubs across the country do really shady stuff, and it's really sad to watch. But with Arsenal, I expect better. Either way, heavy video. I know there's gonna be a lot of discussion in the comments section, but do, you know, let me know what you think about it. What could Arsenal have done better over the last few years? Because, you know, whatever you think about certain situations, I think it's hard really to come away from this video with all the evidence and be like, yeah, they're not hypocrites. I'm not gonna lie, there's so many decisions that Arsenal as an entity have made that just go against a lot of the things that they preach and a lot of the ways they've dealt with other situations. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. If you enjoyed, then obviously hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. You can also follow me on social media. It is at the official FNG on Twitter and on Insta. But yeah, Arsenal, fix up, man.